in renewable energy. So we'll finish the rally here by taking some speeches which will focus on our government and what our government needs to do, which is get out of the way, allow people to get in power who do deliver the kind of action that we need to tackle climate change. So we're going to take our first speaker. I'm going to co-chair, this session with Tina Louise Rothery. Tina Louise Rothery is one of the fracking nanas from Lancashire. Tina, come to the stage.
Tina.
Co-chair with Tina, one of the fracking nanas from Lancashire. And I'm going to invite up the very first speaker for the fun run. If you could just let us...
She doesn't speak for us.
Well, she speaks for us. She speaks for us. So, I'm going to invite up Barry Gardiner, a great friend to the campaign against climate change. And it was so good to hear Barry. We came and spoke earlier in the year at a trade union conference organised by the Campaign Against Climate Change. And it was so good to hear him say that Labour will ban fracking if Labour get into power. Barry Gardiner. Secretary.
On the news tonight, they'll say that there was a march in London against climate change. What they should say is we're not protesting against climate change, we're protesting about a government that does nothing to stop climate change. On the news tonight, they'll say there was a march in London against fracking. What they should say is there was a march in London today to protect our water sources from contamination and our national parks against pollution. On the news tonight, they'll say that there was a march in London that caused inconvenience to motorists. What they should say is there was a march that highlighted the inconvenience to children who are growing up with their lung capacity impaired by up to a third because of motorists spewing out pollution and particulate damage. On the news tonight, they'll say there was a march that called for divestment from fossil fuels that could devalue your pension funds. What they should say is that there's a march today that called for us to stop devaluing our children and our grandchildren's future. On the news tonight, they'll say there was a march of climate activists who predict the world is heading for catastrophe. What they should say is there was a march of thousands of ordinary people who cared enough to turn up in the pouring rain and to have an optimistic vision of a better, a cleaner, a more just and sustainable world. On the news tonight, they'll say there was a march today that called for an unprecedented change in our economy. People that want far-reaching changes in our industrial strategy and that want it now. And we'll say, you bet. You bet. Unprecedented, rapid, far-reaching change is exactly what the IPCC called for to stop us breaking through 1.5 degrees. We will say that's right. That's why we promised to ban fracking under a Labour government. We'll say that's right. That's why we will end the ban on onshore wind and increase offshore wind by 7-fold. We'll say that's right. That's why a Labour government will create 400,000 new jobs in renewables and energy efficiency. And we'll say that's why it was wrong, so wrong of this government when it asked the Committee on Climate Change to respond to the IPCC report, to then prohibit them from making any changes to the 4th and 5th carbon budget, which sets our emissions limits through to 2032. We will say it's now Now that change is needed, and the sooner we make it, the better. Rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented. That's why it's wrong to say there's no point in reducing emissions if the rest of the world don't do the same. It's called leadership. 10 years ago, under a Labour government, this country showed that leadership. We introduced the Climate Change Act, the first one in the world that set the Paris Agreement. 10 years on, in Poland next week, the Paris Agreement is at risk. This should be the COP at which countries begin to ratchet up their NDCs, their own emissions reduction targets. Our government should be taking a lead once again, this time on the critical issue of loss and damage. 21 years ago, John Prescott negotiated the Kyoto Protocol. It spoke of our common but differentiated responsibilities. 21 years on, it's time for us to come of age, to flesh out what that phrase actually means. It means we in the UK began the Industrial Revolution and the era of coal power. We benefited from the economic wealth it brought us. We were the very first major polluter of our atmosphere, and we bear huge responsibility for the climate change that is now afflicting people in poorer countries across the world. It means we must accept our responsibility to help them overcome the problems that we helped to create. Some people would call it karma. I call it justice. If we want to create peace in this world, we have to create justice. And if we want to create justice, we have to live sustainably. Thanks for marching today. Thank you for marching for climate justice, for understanding that a sustainable future is a better future. And when you do watch the news tonight, let's see if they say we were marching against climate change. Or if they understood, we're here marching for a better, a cleaner, a more sustainable future world.
Thank you, Barry. I'm going to ask now for Liz Hutchins from Friends of the Earth, the campaigns director of Friends of the Earth. FO have been at the forefront of the campaign against fracking in the UK. I'm going to ask Liz to speak about that and the other campaigns that FO are leading at the moment.
Hi, thank you to the Campaign Against Climate Change for inviting Friends of the Earth to speak. And like a really big well done to everybody for turning out in the rain. I think we should have a big round of applause for everyone. You know, it really is right that we're protesting today as the world gathers again for another COP in Poland, and my colleagues from around the world are travelling to Poland right now. You know, we should recognise that the window of time for action is closing, and it's the responsibility of the richest countries who have not stepped forward that need to do much more to tackle climate change, because it's the poorest of the world that are most affected and are on the forefront of the impacts of climate change. The IPCC report that came out in October ended all debate about whether we should be trying to keep global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. 2 degrees is simply too dangerous, and to head for that would be to turn our backs on the well-being and the livelihoods of millions of people around the world. One of the authors of the IPCC report, she said at the launch, she said, and these are like global world scientists, she said, "This is not advice, this is a warning about the future of humanity, and we here today have heeded that warning, and the people over there have not." In Poland, we know that the UK government loves to present itself on kind of world platforms as global leaders. And you know, we have made some progress in cutting emissions from the power sector. But we know that transformational change is needed of our whole economy and our society. We need change on the scale of the industrial revolution, and we need it at the speed of the digital revolution. And this government is standing in the way of the change that we need. It's a government that, as we know, is going all out for fracking, and it's brilliant to see so many placards here today against fracking. And Friends of the Earth has stood shoulder to shoulder with communities around the country who have said no to this appalling new fossil fuel, no to it in our communities, but no because it's a threat to the future of humanity. We're opposing the biggest road building scheme that we've seen since the 1970s, where the government is pumping money into putting concrete across, tarmac across wide swathes of this country because they can't see that another future is possible. They're backing Heathrow expansion, which will be the biggest carbon emitter in the country, and obviously they're also banning onshore wind, and they've scrapped the basic standards for low carbon housing and energy, and making it more difficult for all of us to do our bit to tackle climate change. So it's really good to see, the Labour Party is saying this is about a choice, and it is. It's a choice about the future for this country and the future for humanity. I didn't march with you today, I'm sorry. I was at another event that was focusing on Latin America, and I wanted to just say a couple of words about that. I don't know, it was mentioned earlier. We're seeing the very terrible turn of events in Brazil, where Bolsonaro's just been elected and is already starting a military dictatorship. Amigos da Terra, the Friends of the Earth in Brazil, are part of the front line of attack for this new military dictatorship, and they're calling for unity against fascism that threatens to unfold there. Brazil already was one of the most dangerous places on earth in terms of environmental defenders, people on the front line of protecting our planet, with the most deaths caused, particularly in conflict with those who are trying to dig up the Amazon for profits. And one of the environmental protectors said recently, it's like the gates of hell are opening and they've set the attack dogs on us. What I'd like to do now is take a photo of all of you speaking out in solidarity with my friends, Friends of the Earth in Brazil, to show that at this terrible time for them, people around the world see what's going on, and that we're going to stand in solidarity with them to protect Brazil and the lungs of our planet, and protect people who are on the front line of defending that. So solidarity with Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Let's send that solidarity message to Brazil one more time. Bolsonaro, the Amazon alone. Bolsonaro, we say no. Leave 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 the Amazon alone. Hooray! So just a couple of speakers, I should say, to finish up here. I want you to be really generous with our next speaker. The Frack Free United group are going to put in the Frack Free United declaration into Downing Street in a short time after we finish here on this demonstration. Sue Allen, it's her first time of speaking in front of a big audience like this, so I want you to be really generous with her. From Frack Free United will come up now to talk about what Frack Free United are doing about their declaration and how we stop fracking in the UK.
I am very privileged to be asked to speak to you today on behalf of Frack Free United. There has... You got a bit... Yeah, okay. There has been a growing demand by opponents of fracking that the government abandon their obsession with trying to exploit shale gas. To ensure their success, the government has thrown more and more obstacles in the way of this opposition, from the overriding of local government decisions to proposals to weaken the whole structure of the planning laws of this country. No one has done more than Frack Free United to draw together the different strands of opposition into one coherent body that aims to unite residents, campaign networks and politicians who all have the common aim of stopping this abhorrent industry. We can see the fruits of Frack Free United's labours in people and politicians increasing awareness of the dangers of fracking, and in the collection of thousands of signatures on the declarations about to be handed in to the Prime Minister. I find it astonishing that we have a government that appears to be able to close its ears to the barrage of warnings that are accumulating about the dangers of climate change driven by the burning of fossil fuels. The IPCC report in October, the World Meteorological Organization report 2 weeks ago, and the US National Climate Change Assessment published last week are all saying the same thing. Time is running out. We know that there can be no more exploitation of new sources of fossil fuels, yet the industry is spending $100 million a day on exploration. We know that the cheapest way to generate electricity in this country is by onshore wind and solar, yet these have been withdrawn. But we are told we do not subsidise the gas industry. It stands on its own 2 feet. Not quite. Preferential tax rates for onshore gas and the ability to write off 75% of infrastructure spending against tax is, in my book, a subsidy.
Yeah, it is.
Some would argue that the taxpayer pays for the security force for the industry. 2 years ago, Mark Wilson, the CEO of Aviva, said, all subsidies on fossil fuels must be abolished by 2020 if we are to avoid the mother of all catastrophes. This is a man who is paid to assess risk. That is how insurance companies make their money. Worldwide, subsidies on fossil fuels amount to $500 billion per year. That is 1% of global GDP. So, why is the government not taking notice of what they've been told? Perhaps they really believe that what they are saying is true. That we get so much gas from Russia that Putin could disrupt supplies by turning off the taps. That without frack gas, the lights will go out and the elderly will die from cold. That no one will be able to go home and cook their children's tea. A particular favourite with Claire Perry. I was amazed last week when Claire Perry said in Parliament, it is said that fracking is this new thing, but in fact we have been doing it for many years.
No.
She has not read the reply to a question on this matter by Ross Lewis of the DECC, as it was then in 2013. He said, Quadrilla is the only operator in the UK to so far use high volume hydraulic fracturing. That was at Priest Hall, and we all know what happened there. Since then, applications have been submitted by Rafting Energy, Third Energy and Quadrilla again, and of those, none have done a full frac, and they've been halted or abandoned for safety or financial reasons. So far, in this country, there has been a 100% failure rate for fracking. The government's own advisory bodies tell them that frack gas is both unnecessary and counter to climate targets. The National Infrastructure Commission in 2018, Gas Security and Supply 2017, and Clean Growth Strategy 2017. Yet the government say it is necessary to use gas as a bridging fuel to meet our targets. They know this because they have consulted with interested parties. There have been many meetings with the industry, but so far no one has consulted me. I suspect that no one has consulted you, and I am absolutely sure that no one has consulted the 8 billion other people on this planet who are going to be directly affected by this continued exploitation of fossil fuels and the effect of this on their lives. The whole debate about fracking leads ultimately to the question of climate change. We cannot ignore the fact that if we do not stop the exploitation of fossil fuels, then the world will face unimaginable climate breakdown. Because of the high greenhouse effect of methane, fracking is especially harmful. It is alarming that the WMO report states that methane trapped in the atmosphere has increased to 257% of pre-industrial levels, as opposed to CO2, which is only 146%. The IPCC report tells us that we have 12 years to really make a difference. The World Meteorological Report says that the door is almost shut. What is certain is that the climate will not necessarily move along well-defined computer-generated projections. Tipping points are reached, and when they arrive, the climate can change at an alarming rate. About 11,000 years ago, we came out of a relatively short ice age. It is believed that parts of the planet warmed by as much as 10 degrees in a decade. The IPCC report tells us that in parts of the world, warming is much higher than elsewhere, particularly in the polar regions, where most of the world's fresh water is trapped. A combination of melting land ice and rising sea temperatures will lead to flooding sooner and at a greater level than some are projecting at the moment. The recent US report has noted a rise in sea levels around the United States of 9 inches since 1900. The Eemian interglacial period, about 120,000 years ago, saw a global temperature rise of 2 degrees, sounds familiar, but sea level rises of between 20 to 30 feet, and there was still ice on the Greenland ice cap. To justify her support for fracking, Claire Perry said in Parliament 2 weeks ago, "We have excellent science, it is a perfectly safe technology." It probably is when you reduce the science of seismology to dropping bags of flour on your mother-in-law's kitchen floor. We have excellent science. The IPCC report had 91 lead authors and 133 contributing authors from 40 countries. They assessed 30,000 scientific papers. The Minister has called us a travelling circus. Our own MP in Rydale has referred to us as a mob. Others have claimed we are Luddites, impeding progress. With a remarkable metamorphosis a few weeks ago, we suddenly became a well-organised pressure group, resisting the progress of the industry. It is thanks to you, to FFU, and all the other people who in one way or another have resisted this industry, that we do have a chance of stopping it in this country and making a contribution to the increasingly growing demand for governments to act to save the earth on which we live. I will finish with a sentence I came across by the American writer Michelle Alexander. I thought it was so appropriate for today. We are not the resistance. We are the river they are trying to dam. They are the resistance. They are the minority, people trying to stop the flow of history. Thank you.
No social license to fracking.
That won't be the last time that Sue speaks in front of a big crowd like this. Thank you, Sue. That was absolutely fantastic.
You know who she is?
We're going to finish with our last speaker, our last couple of speakers actually, and then after that let's finish with a little bit of chanting along the lines of what Sue was talking about earlier on. Our last speaker is Claire James, the campaigns coordinator for Campaign Against Climate Change. It was Campaign Against Climate Change that we organised today's demonstration. Claire has played an absolutely central role in making sure that everything has come together and that you're here and that we've been able to march and all of those kind of things. So I'd like to invite Claire James to finish off today's demonstration and rally.
It's brilliant to see you here. Thanks so much for coming. So for short people, let's adjust. Yeah, great. One person I'm just going to introduce is going to say a few words because we're here on the streets today to call for action on climate change, and we can do that. We have that freedom, but in many countries that's not the case. It's in many countries environmental defenders are getting killed. And these are often where people are in the front line of the impact of climate change, the front line of fossil fuel extraction. So just a few words here. It's Kieran from the Global Justice Now blog.
Hi everyone. There's a reason I brought this sign today, and we have some other signs with me. We talk about preparing for the future, but we have to remember that right now, in the present, there are indigenous communities and black and brown communities in the Global South who are currently fighting against climate injustice as we speak, and who are disproportionately affected by this system, this unsustainable capitalist system that we have. We need to remember the connection between capitalism, colonialism, and climate change. These things are not separated. We must have solidarity with the communities who are on the front line, indigenous communities in places like Brazil, in Colombia, in Mexico, in South Asia, in the South Pacific, where communities have already had to leave their islands because of the rising waters. There's increasing forest fires, hurricanes, and there's also, I was just going to say that this system was built on the backs of indigenous people and brown and black people, and that continues to this day. The materials that are damaging our ozone and adding to the CO2 in the atmosphere are being extracted from the Global South, and are being extracted primarily from communities in the Global South, where we have people who are on the front line. 207 environmental defenders were killed in 2017. People like Berta Cáceres, who is a land defender, indigenous land defender. I think that's about it. I think I had more to say, but we must remember that there are communities on the front line right now who are dying, defending this planet, defending their land. And I think I'll finish with a chant. Climate justice now for the Global South. 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 Thank you. Thank you.
So what I wanted to do to bring today to almost to a close was just to recognise that we're part of a climate movement and the different ways that we're all playing our part. And because of what Kieran's just said, I'm going to kick off by recognising there are some groups in this country that do their best to bring the voices of the global south to the corporations that are exploiting them. So I'm going to shout to Global Justice Now, we've got the platform who yesterday were campaigning against UK government credit funding being given to fund fracking in Argentina. The London Mining Network comes to AGMs. So that is one way that people are fighting climate change. And we've heard from so many different ways today. The people who put their bodies on the front line to fight fracking, and the aviation. Let's just have a cheer for each of these fracking campaigns. We've got the aviation campaigners. The government might have voted through a third runway at Heathrow, but the fight is still going on, and there are more fights against aviation expansion around the country. I'm going to shout out to those who do the really tough work of trying to talk to politicians and change their mind about climate change, speaking directly to them, because now that is grueling work. Shout out to independent journalists particularly, but other journalists who are trying to break through the apathy and denial in the mainstream media on climate change and get the word through about the urgency of the climate crisis. So let's have a cheer for them. And the photographers. Oh, we've got a request for the photographers. Anyone want to cheer for the photographers? We've got the people who work on community energy, who are trying to install renewable energy in the face of government cuts in the system that's ever more and more difficult. People putting practical solutions in place on the ground. And we shout out for trade unionists who are campaigning for climate jobs. And yeah, we had it at the beginning, but let's have a shout out for Extinction Rebellion for getting the word out about urgency on the streets. Thank you. So, we hope that there will be a good outcome from the UN climate talks in Poland. But either way, the fight goes on. And I want to bring it back to because I think it's worth saying again about the Australian school children, students who went out yesterday. So, yesterday in Australia, over 8,000 school students walked out of the school. They filled the streets in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. On Wednesday before that, 1,700 went to the Parliament in Canberra. The Prime Minister told them to go back to school. The Australian Resources Minister said that they should, literally, he said this, they should be in school learning about mines, geology, and how to drill for oil and gas. That's just like villain. So those kids, they are not going to sit down, they are not going to shut up, they are not going to be silenced, and neither are we. The climate change movement is an international movement, but I've described the different ways that people are campaigning. There is a place in that movement for every person. It may not be campaigning the same way, it may not be doing the same things, but we all can go away and play our part in the most urgent challenge humanity has ever faced. Thank you so much for coming today.
Claire, thank you so much. So we've just got a couple of things to say before we finish. Richard has lost one of his clipboards.
I know!
So if you've got one of Richard Roberts' clipboards, he's not autographing it for you, you just hand it back in, please. Okay, so still missing a clipboard. Secondly, is Sam out there with any collecting tins? Sam, are you there? Okay. You have to do it online. If you've got any money to contribute to the cost of the demonstration and the ongoing climate work, then please do. I just want to finish with this. So please, it's Claire's message. Whatever you can do, get involved. So if you are in your local anti-fracking group, get involved with your local anti-fracking group. If you live in London, the southeast, get involved now because it's coming our way. If you are in a school, listen to what the Australian school students have done. Let's take up that banner and let's carry it here into the UK. It's got to be time. It's got to be time. The next demonstration, when you hear about it, get your friend to come, get your workmates to come, get your trade union branch to bring its banner. If you're in a trade union, get a motion passed in your trade union branch. If you hear of the next direct action, get involved, come along. The next Extinction Rebellion action, get involved, come along. Let's build a global climate movement and let's start where we live here in the UK. Give yourselves a final round of applause. Thank you so much for coming along today. On the student demonstration, it doesn't quite work here, but I just want to say it. One of the brilliant slogans on the Australian students demonstration
From Scotland, what's going to get a ban?
was when you hear student, when I say student, you say power. Would it work for us? When I say student,
Say power!
it's just not working for us because we're too old. When I say student, you say power. 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 Even the oldies can do it. And a final chant of, can we do it this way round? What do we want? Climate action. When do we want it now? What do we want? Climate justice. When do we want it now? What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. When I say student, when I say student, say power. When I say student, you say power. When I say student, you say power. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. Power to the people.
Okay, thank you guys. Let's all be at Whitehall.
We've got a ban in Scotland.